All right, Katrina, last Tuesday, it was the first time that out meaning folks who are a member of the LGBTQ community and they're proud of it. They're not, trying to hide it. It was the first time that there were some members of that community on the ballot in all 50 states and on the ballots in DC, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And they had a pretty good night. We were told that out of the 714 races, that 436 individuals won those races. But how ironic is that at a time that members of the LGBTQ community are making history in terms of being authentically themselves, running for office, that states around this country are enacting laws that target them, that try to limit their access to education, their access to health care. What do you make of that?
I think it makes good sense. I mean, you got to think about it. When there are policies that attack a particular group, it's best to have someone from that group at the table. And I think the LGBTQ community has recognized that they have a right to run for office, and it's probably best that they have someone who represents their particular values in office. I mean, California itself is looking at more than 10% of the state legislature possibly being of the LGBTQ community. And once you see an attack on a particular community, whether it's the Black community, whether it's women, you will see more people step up because there's momentum to capitalize on. You have a number of groups that support LGBTQ rights who raise a lot of money for candidates, and they support these candidates. I mean, thinking 714 people ran, 436 won last Tuesday, and you still have more to come in the upcoming ballots. That makes a lot of sense given what the country climate is towards the LGBTQ community right now.
Yeah, it's such irony. So Shayla, earlier we're talking about maybe the need to bifurcate because folks are so ideologically, opposed in their thinking, but yet you have LGBTQ community under attack on one hand, but yet on the other hand, they had a big night. I mean, this was a successful, unprecedented, historical night for them in terms of, wins at the ballot box. How do you reconcile these things that are happening that seem to be, polar opposites?
Well, as an out member of the LGBTQ community, I'm both queer and non-binary. It makes perfect sense to me because it does a lot for our profile to try and convince us that we don't have power, that we don't have, it's the same conversation that happened with us being Black and civil rights, that it's hard for me to convince other queer people that we're making the advancements that we are, because so many of us live in states where we're seeing what's going to happen when I can't get the medical resources that I need and when I'm going through my gender transformation, or what happens when I need to use the restroom. There's so much that parallels what we saw with civil rights activity that makes me think that this is a huge coup, but it's one of those things that's going to have to trickle down because people who are making advancements in government work in a specific echelon. They work within a specific conversation. It's great to see this kind of representation, but I'm waiting to see how that affects the legislation. Because I think about, a few years ago when all of us got really excited to see the shift in representation for women of color, young women of color, and the backlash, some of the strides, watching some of them shift positions that became closer to moderate positions. So representation in and of itself is not necessarily the solution, but I like to think of it in the inverse. The reason why we're seeing so much legislation is because the political leaders knew that there was this much political movement happening amongst the LGBTQ community. Because a lot of times the version that we get told is that queer people are on the margins, but there's a lot of queer people out there that are making lots of money. They're making lots of decisions. The change is the fact that we can live out and openly, and we can live without the same kind of stigma that we used to before. But it's that part that we have to try and figure out how to change.
Well, I think you're right. Obviously, these states saw the political activity, the organizing, and the power that the LGBTQ community was gaining in states around this country, and said, we better try to, stop it before they become even more powerful, which is why I think we're seeing all this legislation. You're right, the jury's still out on what happens in some of these places like Tennessee and Florida and other states that have, even Missouri, that have enacted these really oppressive laws targeting LGBTQ communities. But clearly having folks in these legislatures who are at the table, who have a seat at the table, is going to make a difference. I mean, it is going to, if nothing else, it's like having Ketanji Brown Jackson on the Supreme Court. I remember, as she was being appointed, they were, people who were cynical saying, well, it doesn't matter. The court is still going to be 6-3. Hell yes, it matters. It absolutely positively matters to have that Black woman sitting on that court with her lived experiences, staring at those other justices as they go about spewing the nonsense that they often do. Doesn't mean they change their opinions overnight. Doesn't mean they change their opinions with respect to any one particular decision. But just knowing that someone there with her intellect, her experience, her knowledge, is going to be there to challenge them and to question the decisions that they make, may cause folks, maybe that was why Roberts decided that folks in Alabama needed to have more than one congressional district. Maybe that's why, he made the vote that he made on that important voting rights case involving Alabama. So I feel the same thing about having folks out, as you said, LGBTQ members represented in some of these states.